our first day in prison, they know, just like the police know, just like we know, we're terrified. I was just a hustler, bro. I was a dope boy. I was a go-getter. It's a hostile environment that's built upon violence. Violence is the ultimate consequence. I just felt so fake, bro. I felt flawed because inwardly, bro, I was just a broken, hurt kid just looking for validation and looking for fulfillment. My entirety of my adult life was, already in prison at the age of 23. And I was disgusted, bro. I think my daughter, last time she told me she loved me, she was like 6.
E.I. the King, an entrepreneur who transformed his life with the help of God after a period of imprisonment, now seeks to inspire and assist others facing similar challenges.
But then the third bid, God began to stir me up, and God put like a fire in me. He'd be like, dog, you got a gift. God showed me like, all right, that gift, it's to empower the street, and it has purpose behind it. The favor of God, man, I made a killing my second year home, bro. Touching 6 figures, bro. Pressure washing, bro. You know what I mean? I had my life taken from me, and God's blessed me with another opportunity to walk in what He has for me. I want all of it. Don't forget your stomach touching your back, sleeping on that steel whenever you're facing temptation out here. I know who I am. I know God's purpose on my life, and I'm going to walk in it regardless.
My guy, welcome to the studio, man. I've been waiting for this interview for a minute. I met you at the podcast summit last year.
Yeah.
And so how's your podcast been doing since then?
Man, it's been popping, bro. We were just talking about it before the show began, bro. That's been honestly my main focus as of right now. It's been YouTube, and it's been jumping, bro. Just continually trying to, just push out some fire, authentic, genuine, real prison content. Like, the crazy stories everybody's interested in. Everyone's curious about prison. So of course we give them that, but for the most part, we just want to bring awareness to mass incarceration and really just kind of like unlayer just the underdog story, man. You know what I mean? Despite, our past of criminal history and all the years in prison, that God's redeeming people, like us who come from, that place of being in prison for so long, that, man, God restores, transform our lives, and leads us into success, man. So we just want to highlight those stories.
Absolutely.
Yes,
so for the people who don't know who you are, introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, most definitely, man. My name is E.I. the King. Long story short, man, I've done over 12 years in prison. I went to prison the first time when I was 18 years old. By the time I was 23, I was already in prison my third time. From 18 to 31, only been in society for 14 months. And like I said, dog, at 23 going into prison my third time, I just felt like I couldn't get it right. And a big lie I used to always believe about myself was a tiger could never change his stripes. And just being raised in juvenile programs and juvenile detention, always getting arrested, always just crashing out. Like as a kid, everyone's got their reputation of what they're known for. I was the one who was always known for being locked up. So for a while, especially when I was young, I began to believe that about myself, that this is what all I was ever gonna know. But, praise be to God, in the midst of my incarceration, I encountered Jesus for real, completely transformed my life, gave me vision, gave me direction for my release in ministry and music and podcasting, all these things. And then right now, God's faithful and He's fulfilling all of it, G.
No, that's dope, and that makes me think about, we had somebody else who came on the show who, so I'm not too familiar with the terms, but he went to prison, but he said it was like a level 1 or 2 where it was like open tents and they could technically leave if they wanted to because there's only 2 guards, but they got to do time there or whatever. And he said, there's different levels, and the one that we see in like the movies and everything is like level 4 or 5.
Yeah,
or
max.
Yeah. And so, what do you think is like the main cause for them to separate the prison levels like that?
I think honestly, man, like I tell people all the time, number one, every state's different and everybody's prison experience is different, even if you're in the same state. And it all boils down to, I think at the end of the day, like who you are as a man, how you conduct yourself, and how you choose to do time. But I think for that question, when it comes to like security and housing level, every state's different, but in Florida, it's mixed population. Like, you can have at one camp, people with life sentences and people who are going home in 2 weeks, but they house them differently. So it's based upon like your charges, how you're like conducting yourself while you're incarcerated. If you wilding out, always going to confinement, your custody is going to get jacked up. Or if you got like a murder charge or like an aggravated assault charge, like you're automatically in close custody, but sometimes, people who are going home within months, they can find themselves the HO4, which is lose the highest custody just because they got like
Damn.
an open case, or they got an escape charge, or because they got a serious case and they're in a cell with a lifer, you know. And that was my experience. You know, a lot of times while I was in prison, I was always around lifers, and it was mostly just because of charges on my jacket, you know.
Got you. And so now, you know, I want to dive a little bit to inside. Is it like the movies?
Yeah. I mean, it is and it isn't. Like I said, man, it is what you make it. You know, like sometimes people can go to a work camp. They'll go to reception and they can go straight to a work camp, and they're going outside the gate from like 6:30 in the morning, and they're not coming back till 6-7 o'clock at night. And they're working on the highways, and they're like, you know, trying to get cigarettes and drugs in, or their boss man's feeding them street food, and they're seeing free world people, and they're kind of like in society, even though they have like, you know, supervision and obviously like a cop with them with a gun or whatever. So I used to always envy those people because I never was able to really go outside the gate. You know what I mean? All 12 years. Besides, I think I went outside the gate maybe, I think it was 3 days. At the end of my last bit, I was able to get like my escape DR removed from my jacket, whatever. But the whole point I'm getting at is I always envy those people because I felt like they were doing good time because their time's flying. They're going outside the gate. They kind of get away from all the politics and chaos in the dorm and on the pound. But then again, too, like, or you can, like I mentioned, you could be a guy who's only got a couple months, and you can find yourself in a HO4, you know, dorm, and you in there with a whole bunch of lifers, and they can be wild, and they're gang banging and extorting, and people getting stabbed, or people getting ran down on. So at the end of the day, I think it all depends not only where you go, but ultimately like who you are. If you go in there trying to look for that, you're gonna find it. You know what I mean? Or people who are shark bait, you know what I mean? They're gonna be preyed upon. People prey upon the weak. But at the end of the day, I think it's more so just about respect and how people conduct themselves as men. You know, like the ultimate law of the land is respect. You know, so.
Got you. And so from your perspective, what do you feel like, you know, because you've been around these people, what do you feel like mentally is the biggest difference between a lifer and somebody who's just doing, you know, 10 years or something like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, man, it's probably classified based upon person rather than time. Because sometimes, like, I know a lot of lifers, got a lot of my big homies doing life. Shout out to everybody on the lockdown, man. Free all the real ones, man. Forever convict. But I got a lot of big homies who got life, and there's people that I know who got life. And I can look at the people that I'm thinking right now in my mind, and I can see two different types of people. You see one person, you can see it on them. You know what I mean? Like, yo, it's weighing in on them. But then again, it comes in waves. You know what I mean? Like even with a short bid, like sometimes your time's weighing on you, and all you're doing is thinking about everything you're missing and your kids, and you're not getting viso, so it's weighing on you. But other times you're not even worried about the streets. You're worried about when they finna open up yard, and you're more involved in the prison world. But from my experience, the people who really aren't fazed by their time, whether they have a life sentence or 10 or 20, it's more so their paradigm of how they view life. And from my experience, the people who have it on lock and are really content is the people who understand God's purpose for them while in the midst of their bid. You know what I mean? Like I mentioned before, not only did Jesus transform my life while I was in prison, but the most mature men of God that I know in my life have life sentences. You know what I mean? And God transformed their life while they're in prison. So now their prison bid isn't a bid. It's a missionary journey, and they're walking in purpose and God's purpose for their life, and they're empowering other people. They're being active. They're on the grind. You know what I mean? It's keeping them busy. They're moving. They're focused, and they're content, and they're walking in fulfillment. Doesn't mean they don't have bad days. Of course they do, but those are always the people I see have the most peace and the most contentment. You know what I mean?
Got you. And so what do you think is the biggest change that happens on the inside to make them find God rather than them finding him on the outside first?
Yeah. Man, I think that's a very, I think that's a complex question, bro, because, you know, you always hear like the stigma, like, oh, that's jailhouse religion. Everybody gonna go to prison and find some religion. Like, well, I remember when I was a kid growing up watching all the prison movies, the only thing I thought about prison was two things. One, you go to prison, become Muslim, or you start writing poetry. That's like what I always seen in all the movies, you know? So I understand that. But at the same time, bro, like, you don't realize you need a life jacket until you're drowning. You know what I mean? Until you're drowning in the ocean. You don't need it until then. So a lot of times in life, when we're out here in the world or in society and we think we got it all together, whatever it may be, selling dope, robbing, or whatever lifestyle of crime we were living, for the most part, we were moving too fast, or we weren't really fully aware of who we were as men and what's missing. until, things start crashing, and falling apart.
Mm.
And I think, a sick person doesn't realize they need healing until they first realize they're sick. So I think for most people, throughout their incarceration, it's like, all right, like I mentioned, I went to prison for my third time at 23. There's something wrong here. You know what I mean? Like I'm jacked up, obviously. You know what I mean? I can't get it right. There's a disconnect in my life. And I think it was just through maturity and the realization of that. And ultimately just God drawing people to himself. I think everybody's experience is different, but I think that I mention all the time, we were at a prison this morning and I was sharing with the inmates there at that prison that, it's in the midst of our incarceration, in the midst of like everything being removed from us, when we can become that much more accessible and dependent upon God, and it's not a crutch, it's not a cop out. It can be if it's not real, if it's not sincere, but only you're it's up to you, your response, if it's authentic for you or not, so.
Got it. And so do you have, and I have no idea, but, in study psychology, I've always wanted to ask the question of, what is a conversation like with a serial killer? Because in seeing something like that, their rationale towards life in general, their perspective is automatically different. We see the documentaries of, the big ones, the Zodiac and Marilyn Manson and all of those people and stuff like that. But, when you're next to somebody, what does a conversation look like in that regard?
Yeah. I think even that too, bro. Like sometimes, man, you find out people's cases and like you wouldn't even think like, dang, like I don't even know, bro, was like, you know what I mean? You wouldn't assume that, until you hear like, hey, bro, like, like bro got some crazy charges and they hear about the case or whatever, because it's like a, high profile case. I would say with some people, of course, you can see like something's off. Just like, people, you can feel things, you can feel vibes, or you can, sense things, especially in prison, man. Like all you do, it's a hostile environment that's built upon violence. Violence is the ultimate consequence, so it's so hostile and there's so much manipulation and, mental like warfare that in prison, especially doing a long amount of time, you begin to really become like keen and discerning and aware of people and body language and gestures and inflections and tone and all these things. The moment someone walks in the dorm, you profile them, and it's a survival tactic, and you can pretty much read a room within your first day in the dorm and trying to see who's who and how people move. So I guess you can kind of see that too with people who are like, all right, you know what I mean? Like, buddy ain't right. Like he's really got a mental illness that led him. He didn't just get mad and catch a body. Like the dude like gets off on killing people. But I got a friend, I won't mention his name. He's got 66 years. He killed an entire household of people and put a baby in the oven. You know what I mean? Like heinous, like disgusting. But I didn't know that for years. I think maybe like a year of knowing him. You know what I mean? He's a high ranking gang member on the pound. But got unactive and the Lord transformed his life, and he was wild in the streets, gang war, and he just nutted up and went crazy and killed a whole house, which is insane, but you wouldn't assume that just by building a relationship with them until I heard that from somebody else, so.
Yeah, nah. And so I'm sure the same thing applies to, I don't really know the term, but somebody probably that's like being, extra friendly or a booty bandit, something like that.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
Like, is that like heavy? Do they have a lot of those?
Oh yeah, of course, bro. Yeah, of course, man. Homosexuality is definitely rampant in prison for sure. Booty bandits are definitely a thing. I was on, shout out to Ian Bick, man. I was on his pod talking about that, and we're just kind of laughing and kikiing. But yeah, for sure, bro. You got guys, and it's crazy too. I was telling somebody about it the other day. I think someone asked me about it, and it's like it's crazy because whenever you're exposed to everything in prison, you see it. So there's nothing new to you. You done seen everything, But I think I remember like, growing up in prison, like I mentioned, I went in when I was 18. So I was a jit. I remember like growing up in prison, like the old heads would call me jit, and then I grew up as a mature man in prison. I'm calling the other younger guys jit, so you grow up in the system. But I think I remember there was this guy on the pound and he was like one of the heads of this set, and in prison, of course, that's not allowed with certain sets. But then again, man, like every prison's different, and sometimes they get away with it at a certain spot, sometimes they don't, sometimes they run down on them for doing that, whatever. Well, this guy had slid into our dorm just to check the whole dorm. about his boy, about the punk he was messing with.
Mm.
And he got a life sentence. He let everybody know during count time. He came in there just for that sole reason. You know what I mean? Hey, that's my punk. Don't mess with. You know what I mean? So of course you see all that. It's definitely real. It's definitely rampant. You see the finesse game with the booty bandits trying to finesse the guys who are, scared or green, don't know what's going on, whatever it may be, with drugs or cigarettes, and they just trying to play them close. You know what I mean? So yeah, you see all that, bro. All the deception and manipulation. You see it all for sure.
Got you. And how do the term snitches get dealt with?
Paperwork. Well, honestly too, man, like I said, every state's different. I always hear, especially like out Cali, I think Cali and like Texas are probably like, from what I hear, from other, like whenever I travel going into prisons or even through YouTube and all that. And most prisons, like real prisons, they'll make you put like the paperwork like on deck immediately. You know what I mean? To make sure you didn't like snitch on nobody in your case or got no crazy sex charges or things like that. Because if you do, they make you get from around there. You got to check in. They won't let you live there. But in Florida, you see that more so amongst like the gangs. They police themselves.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like on the open pound, it's just like open knowledge about him. And I think people just like intentionally put them on blast. And depending upon their charge or who they are or how they move, sometimes they'll just be extorted and be allowed to live there. Other times, people will, make them check in and get from around there. So I think it's all based upon like, the state or the people or, so it's always like complex.
Got you. And so now I want to take it a step back real quick and, what was EI like before doing what was your longest prison bid?
I did 7 years, 8 months was my third bid.
Okay, so before you did that, the last 7 years, what was life like for you?
Long story short, I was a good kid, bro. Grew up playing football. My dad wasn't in the home. Born in Houston, Texas. Shout out H-Town. Mother divorced my father when I was 3. Me and my sister took us to Florida. Grew up in the burbs, bro. A lot of people, when they hear my story, all the prison time, they like can or see me tatted up or being from the streets, they would think that I'm from the hood and from the trenches and all that. That's not the case. We're from South Venice, man. V-Town, Lower Bound, which is a burbs, like old retirement village. Nothing but old white people. And football was my outlet the entirety of my childhood. That was like my purpose. I always was a leader, naturally. But I grew up the shortest kid in every grade, had a short man complex, hit puberty late. My dad wasn't in the home. I didn't realize it then, but subconsciously it made me feel less than. It made me feel worthless. So that always led me to be like an overachiever, over-aggressive, a communicator, a leader. I always felt like I had to prove myself to everybody. So it was a healthy outlet for my childhood in sports. But getting older, my preteen years, homies' older brother, other homies' older cousins, selling dope. I seen the goals, the chains, and I seen their leadership, like, and I seen how it looked in the street and how everybody like flocked to them. And of course, with hip hop culture, I just began to be attracted to that and drawn to that. And then smoking weed at a young age, I began to realize that, hey, I can smoke it and sell it and, provide for me smoking weed and make money. I'm like, you know what, this is cool. And now I can have that leadership prestige of being that guy with weed in school. And then I started selling cocaine and pills and, dope and all these things. So long story short, bro, that just sprouted into, just me being locked up and then out of juvenile programs, fighting a lot, selling dope. I was just a hustler, bro. I was a dope boy. I was a go-getter. Yeah, man. So that was, me before, those that last bid. But I did get saved though, genuinely. Like I truly encountered Jesus for real at 18, going into prison my first time. But every time I come home from prison, it didn't transition well. You know what I mean? Because I never really like followed Jesus in society, so I didn't understand what that looked like. And I get out and I began to wrestle with things and I just began to believe the same old lie I always believe, man, a tiger will never change his stripes. What's the point? And I just give up and just run right back to the streets.
And so what do you feel like the biggest factor was in you, responding to life in that kind of way, even growing up in the burbs and, not being in, what somebody would consider the hood or, those kind of environments? What really made sense the most to you to be like, I know you said
I want to choose that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Man, I think I was just looking for validation, bro. You know what I mean? Like, being from South Venice, like we got like small hoods like in Laurel and like Sarasota. So I would always be in the hood, but I would catch the city bus to the hood. You know what I mean? I'd get dropped off and be hanging out in the trap at 15, 16 with 30-year-olds. You know what I mean? Young little white boy out there posted up on the corner selling crack. I like forced myself into that environment. And I think it was kind of more so like I mentioned, I was lacking father affirmation.
Mm.
So I always sought fulfillment in leadership, you know, and it was through football. But whenever I started smoking and my grades was failing and I got ineligible, like I kind of like, I got football taken from me because my own, you know, choices. I think that the streets became like my second alternative of like trying to fill that void of validation and being accepted and proving myself to people, especially because like I've always been an underdog. I was always the shortest kid, like in all the football teams, but I was a captain of the defense and as a captain of the team. So I always led me to overachieve. So I think it also kind of was like the same approach in the streets. Like I don't belong there. You know what I mean? I didn't need to be there, but I'm a prove myself. I'm just, you know what I mean? So I think it was kind of that, bro. It was me just trying to prove myself to everybody else because inwardly, bro, I was just a broken, hurt kid, just looking for validation and looking for fulfillment. You know?
And so, you know, how was your family reacting to you doing this?
Yeah, my mom, man. Shout out to my mom, Mama Dukes, love you. That's my rock. She's been there forever, and I draw my mom through the mud, bro. And she's just being a mom, bro. Love me through it all. She let me like go kind of early. She like washed her hands with me, I think around like 15, just because you know, she's seeing that like there's no getting to me, you know, couldn't discipline me. She tried, she did her best, you know, but she's working, you know, nonstop to take care of me and my sister. My grandmother pretty much raised me and my sister. She's always working. So she would try, you know, she tried to talk to me, she tried to ground me, but you know, I'm just a young kid. I'm just running, you know, just leaving, not listening. But she was there for me through it all, bro. And but around like 15, you know, she kind of like just let me do me. You know, she realized that I'm just gonna crash out. I'm gonna have to learn the hard way. I remember when I was 18 years old on my 18th birthday, my mom called me. And the first thing she said was, I'm not going to bond you out. I'm like, dang, man, like, thanks for the happy birthday. You know, but she's like, no, I'm letting you know you're an adult now. You're going to go to the county jail as an adult and you're going to end up going to prison. I'm not going to bond you out. And she stuck to her word because I caught my first adult case, you know, probably like maybe a month after that. And she definitely didn't bond me out. She didn't sign for my bond. I had my baby mama's mom sign for my bond, you know, but she was always there. You know, she was with me through it all, even at the times when it was kind of like tough love. So, but of course I hurt her. Looking back, that was my deepest pain. You know, I remember being in a courtroom or whatever and just always watching my mom cry. And I always hated myself for that, you know? So, but shout out to my mom, man, always holding me down. So.
Nah, dope. And so give us a little glimpse of what's going through your mind now, you entering for the third time, and it's like you have 7 years.
Yeah. Man, I tell people all the time, it's different when you go to prison with a bid. And don't get me wrong, I got sentenced, like they gave me a 9-piece. And on a 9-piece, you got to do 7 years, 8 months, day for day, with your gang time, 85% in Florida. That's nothing. That's nothing compared to people getting chunks, 25, 50, life, elbows, you know what I mean? So my little 9-piece wasn't nothing, but it was still a chunk for me at 23. And like I said, I'm already institutionalized in and out of juvenile programs, in and out of prison. I was only out for 8 months, went right back to prison again. I did 2.5. At 18, was out for 8 months, went back, did another 2 years, and then I was only out for 6 months. And then I catch a 9-piece. You know, so my kids were born the first time I was in prison. I came home when they were 2 years old for 8 months. I came home when they were 4 years old for 6 months. So my entirety of my adult life was, you know, already in prison at the age of 23. So when I caught that 9-piece, dog, I was hurt, bro. I was suicidal. I accidentally ran over a police officer in a high-speed chase. I didn't run him over. I hit him with my vehicle on accident. I didn't mean to. To this day, I have no recollection of the entire night. I was blackout drunk, got in a fight at the club, got kicked out, was fleeing the scene. And apparently the cops were trying to like stop me by walking in front of my vehicle. And I accidentally clipped his leg. Literally to this day, I got in a high-speed chase, hit 2 huge Royal Palms. They're like super thick. They're like 2-3 stories high in Sarasota. Derooted 2 of them. Seatbelt snapped, airbag didn't deploy, was ejected from the windshield. Femur snapped through my thigh. You know, how to get Bayflighted. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, unconscious, handcuffed to the bed with 2 cops in the room. And I have no idea what happened.
Damn.
My legs all broken. I'm jacked up. I'm laying in a hospital bed. And all I know, I'm going back to prison. But I don't know what happened. So I'm like, what happened? What happened? And they're like, man, you finna do life. And they won't tell me nothing, you know? So I'm freaking out. So the nurse comes in. I'm like, what happened? What happened? She's like, you were in a car accident. I'm thinking I was with 2 of my homies that night. So I'm like, what about them? Are they okay? She's like, you were by yourself. I'm like, who did I hit? Are they all right? She's like, you hit trees, whatever. And then long story short, you know, I just knew right then I was facing a lot of time. And, you know, being going back to the county jail, I just felt so fake, bro. I felt flawed because, like I mentioned already, I genuinely received salvation at 18, and it was authentic, bro. While I was in prison, I really genuinely, seek the Lord in His Word and in prayer, and I'm walking it out. You know what I mean? I'm staying away from all the chaos. I'm being discipled and mentored by other mature men of God, like I mentioned at the beginning, who've been sentenced to life, and I'm really beginning to discover like God's purpose on my life. But I dropped the ball. The first time coming home and the second time, and kept going back to the streets. So like that third time, I'm like, dang. Dog, I just felt flawed as hell, and I just felt shame, and I just felt like disgusted with myself. So I'm like, man, I'm finna thug this one out, bro. Like I was mad at God, I was mad at myself. I was fighting in the county jail with a broken leg, getting new charges and confinement. And that was not the first time, but that was probably the most serious I contemplated suicide. I remember coming back to the sentencing. It's different like when you got a offer on the table and it's really the one and only plea deal. If I don't take the 9 years, they're going to withdraw it. They're going to habitually violent offender act me or PR me. And I'm looking at it easily 15 years, But because they knew I didn't gun him down and I probably didn't even hit his leg, but just because of their word against mine and my record, I had to take it. But I remember taking that time and it actually sinking in, like coming back from the courtroom, going back to confinement. Because, I was in there for fighting. I just remember I didn't eat for days, man. And I just remember like I just stare at the sprinkler on the wall. And like in county jail and prison, that's a common way. People kill themselves as they tie their bed sheets and they're rapping against the sprinklers, you know what I mean, to hang themselves. And I was disgusted, bro. I knew I was gonna miss the majority, all of my children's life, their childhood. I wasn't gonna come home till they're 12 years old. And I was just sick, bro.
How many kids do you have?
I got 2. Twins. Yeah,
twins?
They're turning 4. They're turning 15 next week.
Girls, boys?
Boy and a girl.
Shout
out to Stephen Azari.
And so, what was it like before I get there, you getting towards the end of your 9-year bid or doing a 7 to 8 months, what is that feeling for you? What changed in you to say, I'm going to truly change coming out now?
Yeah. That transformation happened during the bid for sure. Like I mentioned at the beginning of that bid, I was mad at God. I was mad at myself. And I'm like, I'm going to thug this one out. I'm smoking weed, K2. I'm trying to run down on female officers, you know what I mean? Have sex with them. And I'm just, just hanging out. And, but God's faithful. He restores His people. And that's what He did, man. God just kept dealing with me. But I think really the game changer for me, the last bid, was like the authentic pursuit for Jesus. It was always there ever since I got saved at 18. Like it was never nothing that was ungenuine. It was always authentic for me. But I think when God began to show me the purpose He had on my life, because like I mentioned, I've always was a leader. So like during that last bid, God began to put a fire. And like I seen in my first 2 bids, like God would use me naturally and like organically to like minister. Cause I've always been super social. Everybody always messes with me. You know what I mean? So like everyone who's wilding out, all like the influential people on the negative side, like all the heads of the gangs and people stabbing people and robbing people. Like those were people that I was always cool with. And so I always had the opportunity as God would lead me to be able to minister to them and share the gospel with them. Like organically, mainly the first 2 bids. It wasn't like intentional. But then the third bid, God began to stir me up and God put like a fire in me. And I began to identify, like when I was wilding in the streets, just off the hinges for chaos, it did nothing but destroy everybody and everybody who was attached to me. How much more now for truth and for righteousness and for the purpose of life should I go off the hinges for the kingdom? And that's when everything began to change for me. I began to preach on the rec yard regularly. I planted 3 different churches at 3 different prisons. And it's all organic, you know what I mean? And like, not to be like, oh, I'm a pastor. No, nothing like that, bro. Just being authentic, making disciples, pouring into other people, us moving as a unit, as a body of Christ, active in ministry, doing outreach in the dorm, on the pound. And of course, I've rapped my whole life, so like whenever God began to show me that gift for music was for the purpose to reach the streets with the gospel, and I began to perform all the time in the chapel, in the dorm, and I was walking in my purpose. You know what I mean? Like I understood the grind, and most importantly too, like I understood what was at stake, because I was a firsthand witness of destroying my own life, but then also too seeing people around me, my friends, my homies. And one of my right-hand men, I was talking about him this morning at the prison, Z Fetty, he was shot and killed his 3rd month of his release. But I watched the Lord. He was a young wild jit who was just crazy. And I watched watched the Lord transform his life in prison. And he was like, you know, right there next to me, right-hand man in ministry. He got out, backslid, was shot and killed 3 months later.
Damn.
And it was through his death that God really gave me vision for everything that we're doing now with Block Hustle and Block Hustle Entertainment. So I think that really, his death, God used that to bring forth life and really to catalyze vision to reach the streets. And then whenever like I received the vision from God, bro, you know what I mean? Like not some mystical, super crazy experience, nah, but it's a fire in my soul to be used by the Lord to reach the streets with the gospel, to ultimately that people can find their purpose and who God created them to be, and that we stop destroying our lives. You know, so whenever I began to walk in that and tap into that uniquely as God designed me, whole game changed. Game changed. So in closing for that, I knew coming home, like going back to the streets, wilding out, that's not even a question. You know what I mean? Of course, I knew I was going to come out here and wrestle with women or other temptations for sure. But like going back to the streets, oh, no, not at all. Because I was walking in my purpose. And I think the longevity of that bid and being consistent and walking in that really helped me. And also, too, understanding that I think a lot of people in the streets, we don't understand moderation. We're like all the way in or we're all the way out. So I think God began to teach me too throughout that bid that even while I wrestle with things, it's okay. I can wrestle with it with God and I can still keep going. You know what I mean? So
no, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I know the statement is true for a lot of individuals out here, but did you find anybody, you know, did you find yourself gaining any enemies or people getting jealous of you because you changed so much and they can see you leading a different kind of life?
In there
and out here.
In there, I mean, yeah, of course, man, you got haters everywhere in life. You know what I mean? So I think in there, yeah, for sure. I actually had a guy, and it was like he was a leader of another religious group. I'm not gonna mention what group it was, but he was like, you know, the head of that group, and he hated me. We were in the same dorm together. And I'm not that type of guy. Like my whole life is committed to the glory of Christ Jesus unapologetically, you know, unashamedly. But I'm also not that guy like, hey, I'm E, I'm a Christian. How's it going? You know what I mean? I'm not like, you know, some people can kind of be like maybe like weird like that.
Yeah.
And it's with good intentions and good motives, sure. But, you know, it's got to be like organic and authentic, you know? So anyways, some people from his religious organization, you know, began to come to like our prayer call and Bible study, whatever. Long story short. And he's then like that, you know? And I think he stepped to me one day like, bro, you better leave my people alone. We gonna send them at you. I said, bro, shoot them. Send them, dog. I'm right here, dog. Send them, please. You know what I mean? Not trying to instigate it, but like, dog, send them. Like, I send them, bro. And it's funny too because that word got out, you know, about our confrontation because it got a little heated. You know, I ain't finna, you know, I'm not Mr. Macho Tough Guy. You know what I mean? I'm trying to follow Jesus here, but you're not finna boo me up and scare me.
Yeah.
So, man, send them, dog. You know what I mean? It's cool. But it's cool because that very next service was like 2 days after that on the rec yard. A lot of his people from his organization pulled up to our service just to show respect and to let him know like, yo, like he's a real one. You know what I mean? So yeah, of course, you know, I think, but it was always like, I guess maybe like from the outskirts, you know what I mean? Not like, no, like in your face. Maybe sometimes people would talk crazy, but for the most part, man, I think people can feel and they can see authenticity, you know? I had some situations to where like I've always wrestled with women, you know, so that even in prison, I would, you know, wrestle with, you know, women officers or women staff. So there was a time when I got caught up in a situation with, you know, a woman. It wasn't too serious, but it got out there. You know what I mean? So I had to face that like, dang, you are the preacher, man. So, yeah. So I had to, you know, eat that, but eat it openly. You know what I mean? But out here, yeah. But once again, too, I think it's kind of more so from like from a distance, you know. But at the end of the day, bro, I don't live my life entertaining that, you know, because don't get me wrong, do we all want like, I guess, you know, validation or to be like saluted but I mean, in a healthy way, of course. But at the end of the day, like I'm not even going to waste my time to be concerned about what the next man's thinking about me or saying about me. I know who I am. I know God's purpose on my life and I'm going to walk in it regardless, despite how you or anybody feels about it, you know? And
absolutely.
I think that's just like the tunnel vision that like successful people have to have, you know what I mean? Like why I'm going to lose sleep at night. What you said, it's different whenever it's coming from within. Those wounds who hurt the worst whenever it's people close to you. So that's different. But from the outside, man, like y'all keep trolling, man. Y'all run up the algorithm. Love the trolls.
Nah, facts. And so now that you're on the outside, you know, there's so many good questions that I wanna ask. So I'll start, the day that you're getting out, what happens for you?
Man, I preached my first day out of prison, dog.
Mm.
When I was in prison, like that was my goal. Like I thought it was gonna be like my mom was gonna pick me up, and I'm like, that's one of mine to take my mom to take me to the hood. I just want to go on the street corner and preach because that's what I did in prison. You know what I mean? Like we're in gangland. I did most of my time in like gangland, and I enjoyed being in gangland because that's from my experience where God was always moving the most at. Where it's violent, stabbings every day, crazy stuff going on. Like that's where like the harvest is, and God's like building people up in the midst of the chaos. And that's where God would always use me, because I'm like, man, I don't want to, like, it's uncomfortable living at times like places like that. But I seen that's where I was most effective at, was in the midst of the thick, you know what I mean, in the midst of the chaos. So that was also obviously the vision that God gave me for release, to go back to the streets, to be in the trenches. So I wanted to just preach on the street corner, just like we would preach on the rec yard, open air preaching. We, of course, we have people circle up, but we preaching to everybody. So that was the desire I wanted to do. But shout out to Pastor Tommy at Crossover Church. He's one of my mentors. He was, riding me throughout my bid, and he knew about the vision that I had for my release. So I was getting out on a Sunday. So he actually orchestrated it to where, like, right from my release from work release, because like work release is what you were talking about at the beginning about how it's really low custody and you can leave to go to work and all that. In Florida, that's at the end of your bid, like 19 months or less. You can go there to save up money. So God bless me, I was able to go to work release, rack up money, whatever. So I was released from the work release center. My mom, my kids came to get me, and we went straight to church. And for 2 services, I was able to share my testimony in service, kind of be interviewed by Pastor Tommy on the stage. And then later that evening, we had a block party in the hood, and I was able to preach at the end and perform and everything. And that was just all God, like, setting me in motion before my release. I went viral in prison before I even got out.
Wow.
Because I was at work release, and I had an iPhone put up in my locker at work, and I was just posting content from work release of me rapping and just doing comedy skits and ministering and things like that. And I went viral on TikTok, and God was just setting plays in motion for the vision that he gave me, getting connected with people in the industry and all that before I even came home. And as all this, God just putting everything in place.
Got you. And so what brought you towards content creation? Like, what really made you say, I'm going to take the route of starting my own YouTube and really go down that path with it?
Yeah, man, I've always been a rapper, so naturally I'm a creator. I remember my mom told me when I was a kid, she's like, man, you need to write a book. And she's always telling me this, so she always identified that that creativity in me. So, I was locked up for so long that I was never big on social media because I wasn't out here. And especially like when I was in the streets, I'm out here like selling dope and, robbing and in the streets. So I would never put anything on social media. You know what I mean? I would stay away from it. I didn't even like taking pictures. You can't even see too many pictures of me when I was in the street because I was just, I like to be ducked off. But coming home, and especially at work at least, I fell in love with social media just because like I loved the creativity behind it. And just naturally, I think I began to understand it, and study it. And they say like what you're passionate about, like, you own it and you begin to master it. And of course, picking other people's brains, learning from other people around me. So I think I naturally fell into that creative space as a rapper and having to make content for your music or to minister and to be unique about it using illustrations. And I get that from preaching, from prison, things like that. And just naturally, man, like it fell in my lap. But I have a homie I connected with on IG. Shout out to Joe Baker. He's a prison YouTuber. So we were connected through IG while I was still locked up. And he was always telling me like, bro, you need to start a prison YouTube channel when you get out. So I used to always be like, yeah, I hear you. But he's like, no, bro, like you need to, like, and he just puts up his phone and he just telling crazy prison stories and he's popping, full-time YouTuber. So for a while I was just focused on music and ministry and I wasn't doing the YouTube just besides my music stuff. But then God just kept stirring me up. And then when I started the prison YouTube, the incarceration podcast, man, it just took off. And like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of been like my main focus apart from like music and ministry has been like YouTube and, the podcast. So.
Nah, understood. Yeah, that's just a good look. Friends like that don't exist every day.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what do you feel like your role has been in now being involved with your kids to not have them go down a similar path that you did?
Yeah. Man, big shout out to Lisa and Gerald. They're the grandparents. Man, they did a fantastic job raising my kids, man. My kids are spoiled. They taught them manners. They're respectful. My kids are great kids, man. So by no means I'm concerned for them whatsoever. But that's been the most beautiful but also too, I would say the most challenging coming home, because remember my kids were born when I was in prison. I wasn't able to hold my children until they were a year old in visitation. I maybe see my kids once a year growing up they were growing up in prison. And for the last couple of years, I ain't seen them for years. So I'm hearing the distance over the years on the phone of them not being able to talk to me. I think my daughter, last time she told me she loved me, I was like, she was like 6. She ain't told me she loved me since then. So I remember seeing it and hearing it on the phone and the visitation, the distance. Of course, they're happy to see me, but, they leave, they're looking back, they're crying. Of course, anybody who's been incarcerated knows the pain. So my first day home, my daughter cried, and it wasn't tears of joy. It was hard for her emotionally to deal like with her daddy, her father coming back in her life. And that's been my number one aim coming home, is just like to prove to my kids, because I think their biggest fear was like, is he going to stay this time? And it's crazy because I remember my daughter had mentioned it to me actually a couple months ago. She was talking about, like, she put on Instagram story, like, don't ever break a promise to me. And I asked her, like, have I ever? And she said, yeah, once. And I'm like, what was it? And she was like, and I'm like, dang, I'm surprised she remembered. I told her when she was 4, I was never gonna go back to prison again. She remembered that, bro, and it broke her heart. So that's been the most beautiful but challenging battle coming home, is to rebuild and to regain my children's trust. And, thank God, with them being gracious with me, but also them seeing out of consistency and me always showing up, me always being there. And now, man, I know everything. My daughter tells me everything. And my son, he's a little more secretive, but we have a great relationship. And so, man, it's been beautiful seeing God restore that. So, of course, man, that's my first ministry. That's my first priority, is my kids, man.
Sure. No, that's dope. And you mentioned you doing the music even before. How long have you been doing music?
I've been rapping since I was a kid, bro. I've been freestyling in the back seat when I was like 3. You know what I mean? Gotcha. So I've been rapping, but I was in the studio, I think for the first time, maybe at 13, 14. I remember going to the studio in the hood, and it was just like a house studio, and we always freestyle on the corner hanging out. And I remember there was a older smoker, Basia, no offense to him, but my dog, and he watched me come up in the streets. So he used to always pull me to the side, but I always heard it from other people too. People would always pull me to the side and let me know, but like, Steve the Fire, I said, everybody. Everybody always said that, but he would pull me to the side and he'd be like, dog, you got a gift. And he was really intentional about making sure I understood that, because I think he used to do music back in the day. And I remember that always stuck out to me, that I was like, I had a voice and that people would listen. And at juvenile programs and all that, I would write poetry, and I started like writing like structured music. But it was really just a place for me to vent and just like to get what I was going through off my chest. So really that's what the studio was for me too. I was just rapping about street stuff, but it was real. It was always like a real narrative, but it wasn't until, I got saved and in prison that God showed me like, all right, that gift, is to empower the street, and it has a purpose behind it. So what would be one of your favorite verses? Of mine? Man, that's hard. I always tell people all the time, man, my best song is my next song, because I'm already over. By the time the song's released, that's been done. I'm like 2 or 3 projects ahead of my releases. But I would say, man, dang, I mentioned it earlier today in the prison event this morning. It's on a song called Progress. How's it go? It's funny too. My biggest weakness as an artist is not remembering my lyrics, because I write a lot.
Hard show for people shooting a music video.
Yeah. All right, let me think. It's like they used to not acknowledge me, but now they know my name. But I don't even care about it. I don't rock with fame. Tunnel vision on my why, bro's locked and chained. And I think just the fact that like tunnel vision on my why. Tunnel vision on my why. Bro's locked and chained. You know what I mean? People locked up. So I think that's a huge thing. And I was encouraging like, people at the service this morning, like when we begin to identify our why, like what is the driving force in our life doing everything that we do? Ultimately, we know generally it's for the glory of God, that the kingdom of God be further. But what does that look like specifically for you? So for me, obviously being incarcerated for over 12 years, and that's where, I spent the majority of my young adulthood and like teenage years, adulthood, whatever, God transforming my life in there, and now God blessing me and fulfilling my vision and my dreams. And I'm just scratching the surface, seeing God open up all these doors. But I know God's only doing all this for one sole reason, and that's to be a template and to be an example to people who are still incarcerated. Because I'm nobody, man. I'm a convict. You know what I mean? But God can do it in me. He can do the same and more in your life. So that's my why. Just to be an example and inspiration of change, that as we surrender our everything unto Jesus, he can do the same and more in your life. So yeah, I think that's probably one of my favorite bars, just being locked in on why. I don't do it for the playlist. I don't do it for the limelight. I don't do it for the opportunities. All that stuff is cool, and God uses all that. But it means the world to me whenever we're doing prison events and we perform life sentence and we dedicate it to everybody in the room who's been sentenced to life. And when you see God really ministering to them boys and encouraging them, when you see them crying, or they come on up to us after service, like, man, that's what I needed really to keep me pushing through, and it's just crazy how like the chaos that we've been through, like, man, how God redeems all that and how it comes full circle,
No, that's definitely, that's love. And so coming out, there's a lot of restrictions for, people prior convicted and everything like that. Did you find a hard time getting work and assimilating back into regular society?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge was just navigating through being like a regular civilian. Man, I'm a dope boy, ex-dope boy, so I'm a hustler, bro. Like, I don't want to make the next man rich. I want to create an empire and create generational wealth. So like I had that desire in prison. So I didn't have any business sense, any knowledge of what that looks like. So I began to, befriend, or I had homies who were successful business people on the streets, and they're just giving me game. So I began to investigate what's the easiest startup, lowest cost, pressure washing. So by the favor of God, I went to work at least, bro. I was able to come home with 22 bands, bro. Damn. I came home from prison with 22 bands, but that's also because I was saving money throughout my entire bid. I was disciplined, bro. God gave me a vision. I was always sending money home to my mom. Put this up, put this up, put this up.
So how does money work inside in prison?
In state, you don't really get paid. In Florida, you get paid in feds, but there's only like a couple positions in like Florida Department of Corrections you get paid. It's like canteen men, staff barber, things like that. So for the most part, you either live off the land or you got people outside supporting you, So the money that was sent into me, people looking out for me, of course, I live off the land and coffee and, eat my workout meals and things like that. But I was also constantly sending money home. And then, stimmy hit, so we got all the stimulus checks. And then at work, at least, man, I was blessed. I got a job as an electrician on like working on yachts. I ain't never even know how to use tools. They trained me. I'm getting paid like $18.50, getting like 60 something hours a week, all the OT, so I'm running up a bag at work, at least, and I'm not touching nothing. So that was my first investment coming home. Was I bought a whole bunch of instrumentals. I booked my first 2 days out. I'm in the studio, like 12-hour sessions. I got my first album written. I'm trying to record it. And then also I bought all my pressure washing equipment. Bought a van. Didn't even know how to pressure wash. I'm doing Uber, watching YouTube videos, how to pressure wash. And by the favor of God, man, I made a killing my second year home, bro. Touching 6 figures, bro. Pressure washing, bro. Pressure washing. I got the fastest growing car wash in the nation. A new company is called Mod Wash. I think they started popping up a couple years ago. Well, I gave this guy an Uber ride one day, and he asked me about my story because I'm a marketing genius. Your boy keep a little QR code with a flyer on the back with like my little bio on both sides so you can scan it. And it says, ask me about my story at the back.
You got to get one of these.
Yeah, that's fire for sure. So anyways, it's an opportunity for me to share my testimony, share the gospel, and, to share my story. So it turns out he did 7 years in prison too. And he was the owner of operations. So he said, man, take my business card. I told him I had a pressure washing company. I followed up with him with an email, and I had all the Florida locations, man.
Wow.
And then just working in different neighborhoods, multi-million-dollar communities, doing tile roofs. HOA puts out a violation on anybody with a dirty roof. So this favorite guy just dropping, the bag on me. But anyways, so coming home, was work difficult? Not at all. I think I worked for another company. I worked at a boat place for a week. I quit. I had to get hernia surgery. I just used my health insurance there. I worked at a construction company doing like framing. Super sweet company. It was just a personal connect. I did that for maybe a month. But then I just felt like it was time to step out in faith. And I started Ubering full time while I was getting pressure washing jobs. So I was building my business on the side of Uber.
Mm.
So that's what, and then the transition flipped to where now I began to do pressure washing full time, and Uber was like a side hustle,
Got you.
including like, the music, record label, podcast, things like that.
Got you. And how long ago did you get out?
A little over 2 years ago.
Okay.
October 3rd this year will be 3 years. So I'm like going on 3.
Got you. And so, well, that actually brings up a whole nother question before I even get there. What was COVID like?
I already
during
knew you was going to go
Yeah,
there. That's
what
crazy.
was COVID
When
like
everyone
during
said the
prison?
year, I knew you was going to go there. Man, COVID was crazy in prison, dog. I remember like whenever it first started popping off on the news. It's, the world shut. You already know. I don't even got to explain it. Y'all are out here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was much more dramatic, I'm sure, out here. But just imagine like from a chain gang, like from the chain gang perspective, we're like watching the news like, dang, like you seeing like in New York, all the morgues are filling up. They're in all these like hazmat suits. So it's crazy. And then they came in the dorm for the first time with hazmat suits on.
Oh, shit.
So we're like, dang, like this is kind of real, so everyone's kind of spooked a little bit. They shut the whole compound down, no movement, no call outs, no school, no nothing. It's like you're locked in the dorm. And they're bringing our trays to the dorm. We can't even go to chow. And then people start getting sick. Yeah. So they got the nurses, and this is at the beginning, and we really don't know like the hype. We just see like the hype on the news. We think people are dying. So it was kind of scary, dog. They got the nurses doing their rounds every day, checking everybody's temperature with a little gun. It's funny because people are getting sick in the dorm, but if you get sick in the dorm, they take you out the dorm and they put you in a quarantine dorm where everybody's for real got COVID. So nobody's trying to go to the quarantine dorm. And plus two, when you're doing time, one thing you begin to cherish is your comfortability. Like you're never comfortable, but like the little bit that you have, like you've been in the same cell for so many years or the same dorm and you got homies around you. Like it sucks when it is up and transfer you one day, because you got used to that environment. So of course nobody wants to get quarantined because of that too. So when people start getting sick before the nurses come around doing their rounds, everyone's putting like cold rags on their head, trying to like manipulate the temperature check. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was crazy, man. And it is definitely, COVID was the hardest time I ever did.
Wow.
And the reason why is because, there was no school, there was no chapel call outs, you're on lockdown. They weren't letting us go to the chow hall. They weren't letting us have in yard for like a while. And then it slowly started opening things back up. But the reason why it was so difficult for me is because I was waiting to go to work, at least at that time. So I had what they call short time syndrome. I'm just over prison. I'm ready to get out of here, but they're not even doing transfers because of COVID, so that was hands down the worst time I ever did in my life. That COVID time was that hurt, bro, for real.
And then the question that I was going to go before that was, it's not so much a question. I want to go into something called Gem Drop. And so in Gem Drop, basically, if people make it to this part of the podcast, we want to give them real insightful things that they could do to start today to take off in whichever path they choose to go. And so I want you to do 2 different versions of Gem Drops. And so I want you to give at least, 3-4 steps for people starting up an entrepreneurship business, just entrepreneurship in general, and then 3-4 steps for people living normal lives after coming out of prison.
Yeah. Okay, I would say for the entrepreneurship, number 1, ask God for a vision. You know what I mean? Not pressure washing may not be for you, and that's cool. But like, ask God for clarity. Like, God, give me a sign, show me something. Like, what's the sweet spot for me? Start maybe doing some self-evaluation. What's the strength? What's the passion? Honestly, I wouldn't say pressure washing was a wrong choice, but I hate pressure washing. I don't even want to do it. I just want to build the company so I can delegate it. So I think maybe that could be something that I could have corrected. I maybe could have shown something more I was passionate about. Whatever. So I say number 1, ask God for a vision. Identify your strengths. And then number 3, like, don't be paralyzed by fear. Scary people don't get nothing done. And everybody wrestles with fear. Everybody wrestles with excuses or feelings of inadequacy or things like that. But like, we got to live life and walking in the realm of the unknown. We got to be willing to take risks. You know what I mean? Not like unwise risks where I'm gonna like jeopardize the well-being of my family. But nah, bro, like take a risk, jump off the cliff, walk in the unknown. And then 4thly, I would say want it. I think I love seeing like guys come home from prison, I see them myself. I hear all the time. I don't say this like the boast, but one thing, a common thing I hear about myself all the time when it comes to anybody who knows me in the music industry or like in business or in work is you're not gonna outwork me. I'm the hardest worker you'll ever meet in your life. Why? Because I'm freaking hungry, dog. I'm starving. You know what I mean? I had my life taken from me, and God's blessed me with another opportunity to walk in what He has for me. I want all of it. You know what I mean? So I would say like be hungry and really want it. And then lastly, I would just say be consistent. The people who were successful, the people just didn't quit. Point blank, period. You know what I mean? I think I look at successful people all the time, and you know, I've never been a hater. I've never been like the envious or jealous type, because I look at successful people and I'm like, yo, they're literally just like me. If anything, I might be smarter than you, or I might be a better leader than you. You just got more knowledge, or you've been doing this long enough. But if you can do it, I can do it too, and I can probably do it better. You know, so I think just that mindset of like, yo, I refuse to quit. This is going to work. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes there needs to be like a pivot. All right, this ain't for you, whatever. But I say being consistent in whatever you start to do as an entrepreneur. For the guys coming home.
So before you get to that, you know, what do you say really scaled your business and you doing in pressure washing to 6 figures?
Man, it was the favor of God. It was really just what happened. I was in a multi-million-dollar neighborhood. Number one, that big contract with the pressure washing, you know, was that was like all the Florida locations. Like, all right, that's a bet. You know what I mean? So that was a bag right there. But in this neighborhood, which is AOA or HOA ran, you know what I mean? They got HOA restrictions and all that. They had just made the decision, which they didn't have before, that if anybody, they have tile roofs, anybody who has a dirty roof, they get violated. And these violations are financial penalties. And they get like, I think 3 warnings, and they get like, I think each warning, they get like a penalty. You know what I mean? They get fined.
Gotcha.
So they put out the HOA violations, and I remember being in, and I was already in that neighborhood for maybe like a year, and it was just a friend from church, you know what I mean, who like, he just was, you know, he was messed up about me. He just wanted to see me win, and he got me in the neighborhood. I think I did his property first, and then he posted me on the Facebook Marketplace. You know, all the HOA communities, big hack for freaking business owners. When you go into a neighborhood, I always make sure I tell every client when I'm done working, number one, all about customer service, being, you know, like professional, building relationships, personable. But I make sure I always follow up with them afterwards, if they could please post, because I send them, you know, pictures and all that. If they could post before and after pictures and giving me a review on their like neighborhood HOA like Facebook page, or like they have like WhatsApp group or whatever. So that blew me up in the neighborhood. And when the HOA hit, man, them HOA people are riding around with golf carts, violating everybody. I'm like, yeah, check all them boys, you know. And it was a rat race, man. You know, I'm going to work every day. Like, I think the longest I worked was like 21 days straight.
Damn.
You know, just trying to chasing the coins, you know, because not only were the people calling me, but now I'm seeing like now other companies are seeing this as a gold mine. So I'm going into the neighborhood every day, and now I'm competing with other businesses. But guess what? That's been over with. That's been done. But who's the pressure washing company in the neighborhood now? Mainly just me. And number one, it's the favor of God, but also too, I think it's just because, you know, maybe me being a smaller business, I don't know, people root for the underdog, bro. You know, and then also too, just being personable and being professional. I think people like rock with you whenever you show like, you know, you deal with them in the right way, you know, so.
Got you. And so, you know, like you were going into the steps for the inmates now.
Yeah, coming home. Dang, I would say don't forget your stomach touching your back, sleeping on that steel whenever you facing temptation out here. You know, because I know a lot of homies coming home to where like I was blessed to be able to come home, you know, with a bag and a support system and already like a network established. And that was just all God like setting up the play for me. But I've never had that before, you know. I mean, I guess I had, you know, some family support, of course. But I also know some guys, like I picked up my dog Ski. He did 19 years. I picked him up, man. Bro, they didn't even let him out with a Florida identification card. He didn't get out with ID or a social. They didn't give him no money. Bro, they let him out with nothing. He couldn't even get a job because he had no proof of ID. He had to wait like 6 weeks to get his social in the mail. And he had to like chase it down and do whatever he had to do on the internet to get it. And they're not supposed to let you out like that. But the whole point I'm getting at is he came home with a bad hand. He came home super discouraged. And not just Ski, but I know other guys coming home to where they're coming home with a big opportunity. Like, here goes a brick of Fetty. you know what I mean? Or, you know what I mean, a quarter bird or some yay or whatever, and they can immediately go right back to what they know how to do just out of survival, you know? But I think the biggest thing is, man, don't forget, like, that's what got us there the first time, in the first place, you know? So I would just say, number one, I already have your mind made up before you even come home that that's not an option. Because we know, man, like, if we continue to live a street lifestyle, it's going to catch up with us in the end. It's either death or prison. That's all it is. That money don't last in the end, you know? So number one, I would just say, like, have your mind made up before you even come home. That it's like, you cannot go back. You know, you refuse to. And then also too, man, just to know you're going to fail. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, the transition out here is not pretty. You know, I think it's difficult, especially for guys doing a lot of time. You know, it's like, it's not prison rules out here. And I think I was referring to that earlier when I was saying, like, it was difficult transitioning home just when it comes to, like, relationally. You know, in prison, the repercussions for disrespect is violence. Out here, everybody's disrespectful as hell. And you got to get used to that. You can't walk around freaking checking everybody. You know what I mean? They're going to catch another charge and go back to prison, you know, and I don't know. It's just like, we got to get used to it. We kind of got to, like, just walk it out, you know, and figure it out as we go. But being plugged in the community, having people who've already have gone through the transition. I think one of my tattoo guys who pretty much did all my tattoos, we were kind of there for each other coming home. He got out a little bit after me. And I remember a lot of times when I'd be going through, I remember I found myself fantasizing about prison a lot. Like, not like fantasizing about it, but I would catch, like, you know, whenever you catch yourself with a blank thought and you just catch yourself, like, you're thinking about something randomly. I remember I first came home and I began to, like, realize that I was thinking about past prison experiences. I'm like, why am I thinking about prison? Or I began to, like, kind of miss prison a little bit. And, like, the structure and, like, you know, like, I got all this weight and responsibility of bills and all these, you know, personal issues with trying to build relationships and all this stuff. And I see my mind subconsciously going back to prison. Like, dang, what is that? I can't tell nobody about that. I tell my mom, she's going to be worried about me and think I'm crazy, or I can't tell nobody else. I'm not going to understand.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something in psychology. And so, you know, I'm going to throw a couple names out there of people, you know, for the people that might watch this, especially. And since you have that audience of, you know, inmates, convicts and everything, you know, don't feel too discouraged with those kind of thought processes, because they happen in a lot of different ways. And it's actually called addiction. When people say addiction, they tie addiction to drugs, you know, but addiction comes in the form of psychology. Addiction is psychological, and psychologically we are addicted to comfort. And at that point in time, your circumstance became comfortable for you, even though it's uncomfortable. It became comfortable for you. And it happens at every stage of life. Somebody who has a lot of money, somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, which is why, you know, when it comes to even people that are homeless, they say they're, you know, it's an addiction to homelessness, because they have things out there and programs out there to help people, and people genuinely do try to help people. I this year I tried to help somebody who came from prison and he just lost his way, because I can see where his mentality might have been, but he got too used to living this the lifestyle of, you know, or the freedom, even though it sounds crazy, but there's a certain level of freedom to being homeless. Because you're not tied down to anything. And he no longer understood or understands how to be a regular civilian. And so your level of addiction that you had with that comfortability, especially when you just got home, is not that hard, or not that hard to do, but not very easy to really get past either. And so, you know, that just comes through a change of habits. And so I just wanted to point that out real quick. But, you know, if you could please.
No, for sure, dog. I appreciate you for sharing that. But I think, like, my tattoo man, he became somebody that I could go to, because he was going through the same thing. So we were kind of like talking through our transition together. You know what I mean? It was somebody I could vent to, or he could vent to. Like, he'd be like, dog, I almost slapped the fire out of somebody today, bro. And like over something like petty, but he felt like he had to respond that way because of he did 15 years in prison.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's like how you respond in prison. You can't let nobody try you. They're gonna think you're soft. So you know what I mean? And he felt a little boy, and it's like, bro, like he's just being rude. That's how they are out here. So like we kind of became that for each other. We were like helping each other transition back home. So I think it's so important for guys coming on from prison. And that's what we try to do in ministry within Block Hustle. We try to be intentional about immediately being there for the people that, you know, are sent to us or that we know who are coming home, because we know, especially the immediate transition home, bro, is super crucial. And we just want to be there for them and, you know, encourage the guys who are coming home. Do you also like, you got to be intentional about mentorship.
Mhm.
They say great people follow great leaders, but not all great leaders are intentional about like finding great people.
Mhm.
You know, it's up to me if like, yo, you know the game with podcasting, whatever. I want to learn it, bro. Teach me. I'm humble. What's up? I want to learn. Hey, I'm gonna bug you. I'm gonna show you how serious I am. So same thing with guys coming on from prison. Like be intentional about finding guys who are like yourself, who've done a lot of time. They made it. They're successful. And hey, man, walk me through this, bro. You know?
Do you have a foundation?
Yeah, Block Hustle. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a church.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but we're like a church without a building. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Our motto is church in the streets. So we outside. You know what I mean? We outside.
Got you. No, that makes sense because, you know, even for us in the military, we have something called the Barracks Legend Foundation out here. And that's pretty much to just bring, you know, veterans out of isolation because it's very similar, you know, our worlds. Of course, we don't go over there for, you know, criminal charges or anything like that, but you disconnect from civilians to a drastic level. You know, when I got home, I wasn't here that long and I ended up in a psych ward for a good amount of time because I couldn't assimilate back into regular society. And, you know, I was having a lot of these thoughts and it would only be other individuals that went to the military me that same way as you, I'd be able to have a conversation with and be like, man, I really want to, you know, just
and they understand.
and they understand because I was a tank crewman. I blew stuff up, you know, a lot of warfare going on. And, you know, you can't explain that to a regular individual. And so Barracks Legend Foundation, even to last year is when we really started to link up with them. But having a foundational team that literally just does activities, you know, just brings you out of just being in your head by yourself and really tapping in with other people that not the same story, but went through
going
similar
through the same thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's dope. Block Hustle. So explain a little bit more about me about Block Hustle.
Yeah, real quick before we get into that. It's crazy too because the people who always understand like my story the most, it's funny because like you can always point out a convict, like especially if you're a convict, you know, you can be in a room and be like, all right, he did time. You can tell by the way they move or just their tattoos or whatever. But it's funny too, I can kind of pinpoint like, you know, military guys too. And I think that even though it's completely different, you know, you guys are really out there with like guns, you know, protecting our country and you guys, you know, all this crazy stuff, warfare that's going on. But in a similar sense, we're in a hostile environment too. Yeah. And I just remember there's been multiple occasions since I've been home to where I've had conversations with like military vets. And like the things that I would talk about or they would ask about, it's like they are like, it's resonating right with them because they went through a very similar transition, you know, from like out of a hostile environment. So I think it's crazy how similar that is, you know, especially like not being like super social or like being around a lot of guys coming on from prison, like they don't do like public spaces and being around a whole bunch of people, you know, and obviously we understand why. So Block Hustle, like I already mentioned, man, we are a church, but not confined to a building. Our motto is church in the streets. So what we do is we travel throughout the nation and we do two things. We target the streets, the trenches, but we also, you know, go back into prisons and county jails and things like that. So pretty much everybody who's a part of the team all come from, you know, like, you know, past of incarceration. You know, a lot of us did a lot of time. Like Big Lou, I think, did 21 years. Trap did 11 years feds. We just signed Trap to Block Hustle Entertainment. He's an artist as well. So the people that we bring into the prisons or that we go back into the streets with, like when we go into a community, we only go to like the trenches, like where they're selling dope at, where the trap is, where they post up at. That's where we'll pull up. You know, we bring sound equipment, we bring artists with us, and we'll just start the day by going out there and bringing a whole bunch of groceries. And we'll just go door to door, passing out groceries to the community. And we really just do that to not only meet tangible needs for people who are in need, but we just use it as a bridge and a connecting point too. You know what I mean? Just to get to people's people's homes to start conversations, to build relationships, and really ultimately not just to share our story, but to share the gospel, to love on people, and just to be outside. You know, we pull up on the dope boys, share the gospel with them, pray for them. You know what I mean? We just like to be, you know, where God delivered us from. You know what I mean? But being back out there to impact and empower the community. And then later on in the evening, you know, we'll have like a big show, a whole bunch of artists perform, they share their stories. At the end, we have a gospel presentation. And then we always like co-labor with churches or like ministries in that area, because if we're not from there, we can't follow up and mentor these people and pour into them, you know. So we try to partner with other churches or organizations who can do that follow up if that's not our city. And of course, we do the same thing in prisons too, you know. And for the most part, not only do we go back into prisons and do we like share our stories and we minister and we perform, but we try to catalyze and we try to fuel inmate-led church, because they say the most effective ministry is native on native. Like you're mentioning, like nobody can relate about, you know, the transition home being, you know, running a tank. But I guarantee you have a conversation with a guy who did it, of course, y'all gonna hit it off, you know? So same thing when it comes to like in prison, you know, what's the most effective ministry? It's not only ministries coming in, but it's the guy who's been in prison for 25 years or 5 years, who's genuinely received salvation. He's on fire for the Lord, and now God's using him to minister to his fellow convicts. You know, so we try to empower that and stir that and mobilize that. And the call to action always in the chain gang is like, man, like, of course, ask God to prepare you for release, but don't forget about your purpose there now. Walk in it, tap into it, serve other people around you, and walk in it, you know. So
no, that's you know, what's the word I'm looking for? That's revolutionary in the way that more people need this than we actually realize. And that just makes me think of, you know, how can I be a part of, you know, an organization like yours to also, you know, put it out there. Because meanwhile, as I wasn't in a prison, you know, in the United States or so, you know, I feel like I've had two prison kind of moments, with one being, you know, just physically in the military. You can't leave. You got to do things on the schedule. You got to go overseas, you know, deployment, do all of that type of stuff. It's not what people would call regular life. That in itself is a sort of form of prison, you know. And then the second prison for me, even before I got to the military, was my mind. And me being in a prison of my mind, I didn't understand a lot of things. And then I did grow up in that environment where there was bad, and I chose bad because that was the only thing that I was privy to. And so when you talk to these people on the streets, and when you talk to these people on the inside, you know, it makes me feel like I want to have a conversation with them as well, from the pure perspective of, if I was still the age at when somebody told me about the military, 19 years old, you know, I'm in my 30s now, you know, if I was still at that age, if somebody had reached out to me with a psychology perspective, or if somebody had reached out to me with a, hey, yo, this is what you could really do with business, I'd have took their hand the same way that I took the military's hand. But the military is the only one that reached out. And so really being able to change people mentally is where the best retention comes from. And I do want to be a part of something like that.
That's real, bro. That's fire. For sure, bro. We need all hands on deck, man.
Absolutely.
Yes, for sure, bro. For sure. And another thing too, man, we always encourage people. And of course, you know, everyone's welcome, dog. We always need hands on deck. But like coming home, we were talking about it this morning too. I think we have a benefit of like receiving salvation in prison, right? Or discovering Christianity in prison. It's because there's no like tapestry in there. It's all like organic. You know what I mean? There ain't really too much Christian culture and tradition. It's like Bible and like an authentic pursuit and encounter of Jesus, right? But sometimes out here it can get a little like, not all places, but sometimes it can get a little muddy. You know what I mean? And sometimes like the center focus can be lost. And one of those things I think is common to see out here is like colonization, or like marketing being like the center focus of like a church or a ministry, and everyone's caught up in like building like the biggest brand, and the focus on the people is lost, and the focus is more so like on the building of the brand and the organization. And the reason why I say that is, man, like our biggest encouragement, challenge to everybody, like, bro, ministry or empowerment, it don't got to be formal. It don't got to be a part of no organization. You know what I mean? But it's like in my world, within, the call to action, what God's leading me to do. You know what I mean, man? Guys rising up, like you said, man, revolutionaries. You know what I mean? And we want to see that empowered and trickle out of our ministry. Of course, we want to see people come alongside and serve and grow and build and grind with Block Hustle. But I think what's bigger than that is people be inspired by what God's using us to do and say, you know what, I want to do something like that too. And it look completely different and it's unique to them according to what God's led them to do. Because that's what movement's all about. You know what I mean? And really like empowering other people. It's like, man, I don't want to hire you to run my business, man. I want to come work with me for a couple weeks or a couple months and I like, yo, start your own. Yeah. Get your own bag. I think that's real empowerment, right? You know Absolutely. What I mean? But like kind of like a selfish mentality is like, yeah, come work for me and I'm gonna have you run my business and I got you right where I want it. You going, you know what I mean? And that's part of business for sure. But I think the more empowering thing is like, man, like, let me show you how you can run this. I think that's what movement's all about.
No, that's dope. Yeah, man, this interview has been phenomenal. Just getting to understand your story on a deeper level. And we met before at Podcast Summit, and they got another one coming up in July, beginning of July, in Atlanta. But just getting to hear your experience firsthand and really just get to sit with you one-on-one. Over there was hectic environment, a lot of people moving fast, like, yo, what's up? Oh, okay, cool, you got this and that going. But really just to sit down and learn the man from across from you is something really powerful that not a lot of people get a chance to do. And you're a podcaster as well, and so when you get to really have these vulnerable moments with people, you unlock a whole different level of that relationship, as far as like, yo, I can understand where this person is coming from, and you get to see a different perspective that you normally may not. Yeah. And so, just thank you for sharing your story, man. If people wanted to tap in with you, learn more, follow your podcast, anything, where could they do everything at?
Yeah, for sure, bro. Thanks again for having me, bro. It's an honor. Fire Absolutely. Convo. Man, listen, man, E.I. the King, I am a rapper. Y'all follow me on Apple Music, Spotify. Just released a project called Forever Convict. The biggest song on the track with Project Pat, FOF, is a banger. More projects on the way. Follow me on IG at EI the King _ TikTok, the same. YouTube, EI the King, but the prison content. Y'all want that prison content on YouTube, the Incarceration Podcast. Y'all tap in. Y'all mark my words. I am going to be the biggest prison YouTuber in the world. Y'all follow the journey, man. Absolutely. Forever Convict, man. Free the gang, man. Free the guys.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on the show, man. Listen, make sure y'all tap in. If you like, make sure you share it with a friend, subscribe, somebody that you know that can use this type of information. And it's your host, Moneybag Rich. And as we always say, we look good, we live good, life is good. Talk to us, we talk back, and we out of here.